So in this lesson, we're doing this car burnout drift effect. And if you've taken my water effects course, we also use this exact same scene to have the car drift through water, so it might look familiar to you. So we're starting in Max with a blank scene. I just have the car model in here. I'm working in units, centimeters. 1 unit is 1 centimeter. So what I like to do is control everything with dummies whenever possible, just to avoid any kind of gimbal, lock, rotation issues and stuff like that. And it also makes it easier to control everything because I can just move the dummy instead of having to, select the entire car and stuff like that. So if you're new to 3ds Max and you don't know how to do that, basically if I have a cylinder here, and let's just say that this is the wheel of the car, what you can do is go under helpers, dummy, and just create a dummy, and you can say align and align it to the wheel and just say XYZ, check that and make sure that it's set to center. And now you can select the wheel, hit link and link it to the dummy. So now I can select the dummy and hit E for rotate, and I can set this to local and rotate the dummy, and the wheel is gonna rotate with it. So then, if I have a larger dummy that maybe is the car, then I would have another dummy here, and I could align this smaller dummy to the bigger dummy. So let's just say that, this is the car and this is the wheel. So now if I move the car, I can link this to the bigger one. And now I'm moving the car and the wheel is moving with it, but I can still animate the wheel independently. So I can just set a key and maybe go to frame 100 and rotate this, a few hundred degrees forward just to sort of animate the car wheel, and it's gonna move. And then I can select this big one, set a key, go forward, move this forward, set a key, and while the car is moving forward, the wheel is spinning. And everything is organized and is working properly. So that's why I like to use dummies. So let me just delete that. So as you can see, that's exactly what I did for my car. I have a separate dummy for each wheel, and then I have a bigger dummy to control the car. So let's set up the drifting first. So you would just go under standard, splines, and create a circle. And basically you can just select the car dummy and go under motion, position, and say add path constraint and say okay. And for the path, let's select this circle. So now you're gonna get an automatic animation from 0% to 100% across your entire timeline, so you can see what that's doing. So I think I only want it to last about 100 frames, so I'm gonna move this to 100 and set my timeline to be only 100 frames long instead of 300. So now we have something like this, and you can say follow, so it follows the spline like this. And now at this point our car is basically drifting. So then you can just rotate the car along its own axis to control the angle of the drift. So I kind of like something like this, and you can just play to see what that looks like. And we have our car drifting around. And if you feel like it's too fast, you can always enable auto key and just lower this percentage. So maybe you can only make it like 70%. So it's gonna take 100 frames for it to only go about 2/3 of the way there. It's not moving as fast. So that might give us some nicer interaction with the smoke when it's not too fast. So I'm just gonna disable auto key and say that I am happy with how the animation is going. So now we just need to basically add the smoke to these wheels. So I would just create a standard Phoenix grid. It's gonna have to be a pretty giant grid because the smoke is gonna cover the entire area as it's being generated. Now just make sure that the car is sitting nice and pretty on the grid. So you can go into here and set it to left. And by the way, I'm just hitting Alt W to go from full screen to small screen again. You can just move the grid down to make sure that the car is sort of sitting on the grid like this. I think that the grid doesn't need to be as tall, so we can go under the grid settings and just lower the Z quite a bit And maybe we can make it smaller on the X and Y axes as well. Maybe it's just a little too big. Lower the resolution. So let's give us maybe 2 million cells, so 10 centimeter cell size for now. And let's set the Z to Gen minus. Under dynamics, I would give it a smoke dissipation of maybe 0.3 for now. You know, we do want the smoke to dissipate eventually over time. So you can see that, especially back here, you can see how it's disappearing. So that's controlled by the dissipation. I would pretty much leave these settings at default. Maybe large scale, we can do something like 0.3. But we can play with that later. I would do maybe 16 for quality. And let's give it PCG symmetric since it's the nicest one. And steps per frame, maybe do 2. I think we're gonna have to do 4 eventually. And the rest of it is pretty standard. So again, let's enable GPU preview under preview. And under output, I want to do velocity and select the path of where I want to save this to. Next, we need to emit the smoke out of something. So we need to give it a source. So I actually already have my source in here. It's just a regular box that I modified a little bit. Create a small box, and then you can go under here and make it an editable poly and select this polygon and maybe make it ID 10. And then you can go on the vertex and move the vertices around until you get it to sort of nicely match the contour of the wheel like I have here. So let me delete this one and go back to my original. So basically you want to make sure that this box is linked to the car, that it moves along with the car like it does for me. So again, you would just go under select and link, and you would link this box to the main big dummy of the car so that now they're gonna move together. Super important. So you can see that I have 2 of them for both wheels here. And next we're gonna just make a standard source and add the boxes as our source. So box 1 and then add and box 2. I'm gonna leave the outgoing velocity at 10. We don't really need any temperature. And for the polygon ID, maybe let's set that to 10. Again, that's just so that the smoke is coming only out of the polygon that we selected, this back one. All right, so with all of these settings in place, let's just run the simulation, make sure that, as always, we are actually getting some smoke. So I'm just gonna run the sim. So I'm running the simulation and we're not getting any smoke. And I've had this happen to me before. What I found is that when you have a grid that's this huge, and an object that is so tiny that the smoke needs to be coming out of, sometimes it's hard for Phoenix to catch that the object is even there and it's not emitting any smoke. So what you can do is just make these boxes larger. So maybe just, you know, scale those boxes up and move them back here behind the wheel. And what we can also do is just give it a bit more resolution to work with. So maybe we're gonna go from 2 to 4 million cells, about 8.5 centimeter cell size. And let's make sure that we have at least 2 steps per frame. Okay, we do. Maybe let's do 3 and run the simulation. We should be getting some smoke now. All right, so I'm running the simulation and we are getting some smoke, but the entire simulation as a whole is still very low res, and that's just because the grid needs to be so big. So for the sake of this lesson, I'm just gonna basically cut the size of the grid in half because all we really care about is this area here, but we're still simulating all of this space on the other side as well. So I'm gonna go back into the grid and just shrink this down quite a bit so that we can get a lot more resolution with a lot less effort basically. And we're only gonna focus on this side of the shot in here. And now I can basically raise the resolution back up and get basically a lot more resolution with the same amount of computational effort. So this is pretty good. Let me run the simulation one more time. All right, so I'm at frame 40 and we're getting something that's starting to look a lot nicer. I ended up raising the outgoing velocity from 10 to 20 just to get us even more smoke. So if I go through the timeline, basically this is what we have right now. It's not too bad. It's gonna look even better when you have even more resolution in there, but it's pretty good. I would go under rendering settings right now and just maybe play with the opacity of the smoke. So you can go under volumetric options, smoke opacity, and maybe raise that up just to give it that more thick kind of look of the smoke. And for the smoke color, you can do something lighter, something more white. So maybe something along these lines. Now I think maybe it's lacking a bit of detail. I would like it to be more broken up. So you can go under dynamics, and maybe for the smoke massive vorticity, I would do something like 0.5. And maybe for the large scale, I would maybe do 0.5 as well. And for the quality, I would maybe do 32. And we can see what kind of a difference that will make in a bit. Now what you can also do is go back into the source and maybe give it a bit of noise. So something like 0.3 should randomize the emission around the wheels a bit more. Everything else I've taught you up to this point still applies. So you can also select the wheel, go to Phoenix FD properties and play with the motion velocity effect. So right now it's 0.5. I'm gonna make it 1 again, which is the default. And I'm gonna do the same thing for the other wheel as well, because we really want these wheels to be picking up some of that smoke and give us more of a, really cool look. And I'm just gonna create a cylinder and I'm gonna emit some smoke around the cylinder, around the whole wheel. So I just create a cylinder here, and you can say align and align it to basically the tire. So I just want to get something that's pretty aligned with the wheel. So maybe something like this. You can hit Alt X to make it see-through and then raise the scale. And I would maybe do 64 sides, and maybe we can do only one segment. And let's scale it down a little bit just so it's pretty tight around the wheel. So maybe something like this, make it an editable poly. And I would select this edge, go to ring and connect and make maybe 2 of them and pinch them out. And then I would just select this one, select ring again, and then hold Control and click on polygon to convert it into a polygon selection. And I'm gonna make these maybe ID 7. Just because it's easy to remember. You can exit isolation mode, and let's create another source. And for this source, I'm gonna select just this outer cylinder, no temperature again, and I'm gonna give it that polygon ID of 7. And maybe we can set the motion velocity effect to something like 3, because we really want that smoke to be affected by that spinning cylinder. And before we forget, let's parent this cylinder or link to this wheel dummy so that they spin together and they move together like this. So now we're gonna be emitting smoke out of this entire cylinder, and we're gonna see if we get a ton more smoke in the scene. So let's just run the simulation. All right, so I'm running the sim and we're getting something a bit more dramatic. There's a lot more smoke going around this whole wheel area. So let me pause and show you what that looks like. So this is the motion of it right now. So it's pretty cool. I would probably give the smoke more opacity just to make it stand out more. So again, in the volumetric options, I would probably just raise the opacity even more just to make that smoke stand out. And what you could also do is go back under the settings here and just maybe emit 1.5 value of smoke instead of 1. That'll give you even more. So for sort of the final simulation of this, I want to make a few more changes and show you one more approach. So instead of emitting smoke out of this outer cylinder, you can just use it to give it motion velocity but not emit any smoke. So I would just select the second source and uncheck smoke, but just leave the motion velocity on. And maybe we can set the polygon ID to 0 so that the whole wheel has effect. And for the first source, I would just maybe set this to volume brush 100%. I'm gonna give it 5 steps per frame and run the simulation one more time. Alright, so this is my final simulation for this lesson. As always, the project file is under the video if you'd like to open that up and look at the settings. I really wanted a lot of smoke, so I ended up raising the amount from 1.5 to 2. I lowered the dissipation from 0.3 to 0.2 just to make sure that the smoke would last a little bit longer. Now, as you guys know, GPU preview ignores geometry, so it kind of looks weird because you can see through the car. So you can go under the Phoenix preview and disable the GPU preview and just look at the smoke particles, basically. So you can play with the smoke color here. You know, by default, it's like gray, but you can make it white so you can see it better. You can even give it a color just so that it really stands out. And then you can really sort of see what you're getting much better. So we're getting some action around the wheel, and then we're getting this nice thick smoke trail, which is basically what I had here as well. So I hope that you've enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one.